Oh. Oh.
Buckle, slow down.
Why? It's so yum.
You gotta leave some for me and Walter.
All right. Can I have some more tea?
Yes.
They're here.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Link Show.
And thank you, Isla, for inviting me back to your playroom. I do love doing a tea party.
I know, it's so fun.
Do you know what else I love though? Sending you the clue every week to see if you can figure out what the Link Show today is all about. So should we find out what it is?
Ooh, let's see.
Walter, do you have the box ready for us? There it is. Thanks, Walter. You're so helpful.
First up, we got the really cool craft.
We do. The craft. There it is.
Okay, then we have... Walter! Where's the clue? Did you lose it? Did you forget it? Is nothing the clue, Buckle?
Oh, good guess. Maybe nothing is the clue, but you know how we're going to find out?
By watching today's preach.
Sounds like a good idea to me. Okay, so I've got a question for you. Is there a food that you don't like to eat? For me, when I was younger, I didn't like eating pumpkin and I didn't like eating Brussels sprouts. Those were the foods that Mum and Dad would make, put them on the plate, and I didn't want to eat them. There was one night where Mum cooked broccoli, and so we sat down and there on my plate were these tiny little green trees. And I knew that I didn't like Brussels sprouts, and so I thought, I don't like broccoli, even though I hadn't tasted it before. And so I was adamant, Mum, I don't want to eat this. It looks terrible. I'm sure it's going to taste terrible. And my mum said, but you haven't even tried it yet. And I said, no, I want to have ice cream. I want to have jelly. I want to have all the sugary foods. I want lollies. But here's the thing. Those sweet sugary foods, whilst they might taste great, aren't really good for me. And it was those other foods like the broccolis that were good for me and they were going to help. And so I'm sitting there that night and this food is on my plate and I didn't want to eat it. I didn't want to even try it. And my dad said, how will you ever know if you're going to like it or not if you don't at least try it? And so I put a little bit of salt on it, a little bit of butter, and I cut it up and I ate it. And I loved it. And to this day, I love eating broccoli. Broccoli is actually one of my favorite foods to eat. Now, here's the thing. In our lives, there's some things that look sweet and they look great, but actually they're not that good for us. But then there's other things that maybe look difficult and a little more hard to do, but those are the things that are good for us. One of those things that is good for us to do that can be hard is forgiving people, forgiveness. So when someone does the wrong thing and they say sorry, are we willing to forgive them? Because forgiveness is hard sometimes, but it's good for us to forgive others. And so a little later on, there's actually a story in the Bible of a guy named Joseph, because we're doing this series on Joseph. And do you remember in the first week, his brothers sold him as a slave, and then in the second week, he got thrown in a dungeon. Well, this week in the Bible story, he's actually going to see his brothers again. And so we're going to take a look to see what he did when he saw his brothers again, whether he forgave them or not. And we're also going to learn what we should do when other people hurt our feelings and how we should respond and the way that God wants us to respond. But we'll talk about that in just a minute. Isla, did you like this week's craft?
It was really fun.
Tell me how you did it.
First, what I did was I coloured in the heart with red. Then I did the words in a pattern. I did purple, green, purple, green.
I love it. And what we're going to do later is get some coloured Band-Aids, and we're going to stick the coloured Band-Aids because we're learning that forgiving others is like it's healing our heart, which is a pretty cool craft. But you know what else I love to see?
Looking at all of your arts and crafts. They are so nice and I just love looking at them.
They're pretty awesome. So if you want to send them through, get your teacher or your kids' pastor to send them to us via the email that's in the description of this video.
I love when you read the Bible story. It's just so good. So, will you read it again?
I would love to read it again. Say hello to Joseph, one of 12 brothers. But out of all of the brothers, Joseph was his father's favorite. And so the other brothers hated him and sold him as a slave in Egypt. But while Joseph was in Egypt, the Pharaoh had a dream about the future and Joseph was able to interpret the dream. And so Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Now the Pharaoh's dream had shown that Egypt would have 7 years where there would be lots of food, but then 7 years where there would be no food. And so Joseph collected as much food as he could during the good years. And then sure enough, just like the dream had shown, the 7 years of famine began, and there was no food anywhere except for the food Joseph had stored in Egypt. And so people from everywhere would travel to Egypt to buy food from Joseph. And this includes Joseph's brothers. You see, the land Joseph was from had run out of food as well. And so Joseph's dad said to the brothers, "Travel to Egypt and buy us food." But he kept his son Benjamin at home because he was afraid something bad would happen to him. When the brothers arrived in Egypt, they didn't recognize Joseph, but Joseph recognized them. And so he decided to test them. Joseph had his servant tell the brothers that they needed to bring back their other brother so that he could see that they were trustworthy. Joseph then had them thrown in prison for 3 days and then sent them home and paid for all their traveling costs and sent them home with food. But Joseph kept one of the brothers in jail in Egypt to see what the others would do. The brothers traveled home and did exactly as Joseph had told them because they were scared that God was punishing them for what they had done to Joseph. But they still didn't know that that was their brother Joseph in Egypt. And so the brothers went home, collected Benjamin, and traveled back to Egypt to see Joseph. When they arrived, Joseph was overwhelmed, and he had the other brother released from jail. He tested the brothers one more time, and the brothers passed the test, and Joseph couldn't wait any longer. Joseph sent his servants out of the room and then told his brothers who he really was. They couldn't believe it. Joseph told his brothers that he forgave them and that he loved them, and that everything had happened the way God had intended so that Joseph could save his whole family from the famine.
I love this story so much because Joseph had every reason to be angry. He could have been angry at his brothers, and that would have been the easy thing to do. To tell his brothers that he was going to throw them into the dungeon because I got thrown into the dungeon. You sold me as a slave, I'm going to sell you as a slave. He could have gotten back at them, but instead he forgave his brothers. Because Joseph knew what his brothers had meant for bad, God made for good. Because of what Joseph went through, although it was difficult, although it was hard, Joseph was able to save his whole family by giving them food when there was no food in the land. We learned in the story that across the land there was no food for 7 years. But because of Joseph being in Egypt, he was able to save up food before it happened, and he saved everybody, including his family. You see, it's hard to forgive sometimes. When people do the wrong thing, maybe they say something mean, maybe they pick on you. It's hard to forgive those people when we feel hurt. Now, it's really important to remember that just because we forgive someone, it doesn't mean we have to trust them. We don't have to put ourselves somewhere where we might get hurt again. That's totally different. But forgiveness is in our hearts. It's when we forgive that person for what they've done. And we can see in the Bible that God says that you and I have made mistakes, but God forgives us. That's what God did for us. And so it's up to us to make sure that we forgive other people as well. And so that's what I want us to remember today, that even though it can be hard, even though it can be difficult, we need to always forgive others.
That's why nothing was the clue.
Good job. I'm glad you figured it out. Did you figure it out as well? But you know what else it's time to figure out? The Bible quiz. The way this is going to work is we're going to ask you some questions from today's Bible story and give you 2 possible answers. If you think the first answer is correct, put your hands on your
Head.
If you think the second answer is correct, hands on your
Shoulder.
Here we go with question number 1. In the Bible story today, the land of Egypt went through a famine. How many years was there no food? Was it 3 years or was it 7 years? You've got 5 seconds. Isla, what do you think the answer is?
Was it 7 years?
It was 7 years. Good job paying attention. Here we go with question number 2. All of Joseph's brothers traveled to Egypt to get food, except for one. What was the name of the brother that stayed home? Was it Benjamin or was it Sven? You've got 5 seconds. Okay, Isla, what do you think the answer is?
Was it Benjamin?
It was Benjamin. You're paying good attention today. 2 out of 2. Last question. Let's see if you can get all 3 correct. In this story today, when the brothers got to Egypt, did they recognize Joseph? yes, they did, or no, they didn't recognize that it was Joseph. You've got 5 seconds. Isla, what do you think the answer is?
Was it yes they recognized it?
No, when they first got there, they didn't recognize that it was Joseph. He had to tell them that he was their brother. You got 2 out of 3. I wonder how many of you got 3 out of 3. But thanks so much for letting me come and hang out today. Did you have as much fun as I did?
I had so much fun.
And guess what? Next week, we're starting a brand new story in the Bible about a guy named Moses. I can't wait to see you then. Bye.
Bye.